G'day Year 7s and welcome to our first video tutorial for our new unit, negative numbers, and this one is going to get you started on exercise 7b and also exercise 7c. Alright, obviously after we did our intro stuff last week and you did 7a, that sort of got you started, and obviously we're looking at integers. Okay, which are basically your positive and negative whole numbers, including 0. Alright, so here we're looking at adding and subtracting positive integers. Okay, so adding and subtracting a positive integer can give both positive and negative answers. Okay, so we can end up with negative answers, and when we're looking at adding and subtracting positive numbers, what I suggest you do is think of it in terms of like a thermometer, in terms of temperature. Okay, if you think of it in terms of temp, particularly with the positive integers, it's a little bit more difficult with the negative, but I'll get to the negative in a minute. But if you think about it in terms of a temperature gauge, thermostat, it's fairly easy to work out what is happening, okay? And I'll sort of explain that as we get through it. So for example, when the temperature inside a newly installed fridge is 20 degrees, but after being switched on, the temperature then falls above 25 degrees, the result is -5. So you've got 20 minus the 25, which will take you to -5 degrees. So if you think of that in terms of temperature, okay, there's our temperature gauge. A little bulb down the bottom there. If that's 0 there, you think about it in terms of, okay, so our first number is 20, so if we start at 20, so plus 20, and the temperature then drops -25, where do we end up? Okay, so you're at positive 20, temperature drops to drops -25, so it goes past 0, because that's obviously 20, don't need that. Yep, and then goes obviously another 5 units, you end up at -5. Okay, so that's where, if you think of it in terms of temperature, it makes a little bit more sense and easier to work out. Okay, so some examples here. So if a positive number is added to an integer, you move right on the number line. Okay, so if you've got your positive number and you add a positive integer, you're going to go right. So if you're using a number line, which are very useful to use for this type of stuff, you're going to be moving right. You're going to be getting more positive. Okay, more positive. Okay, so if you start at 2, move to the right. If you start at -5 and add 2, so start at -5 and you add a positive 2, you're still moving to the right. Yes, you start at -5, but you're adding a positive integer, so you're still moving in a positive direction or towards the positive numbers. You still end up with a negative answer, because it's -5. You start at -5, and the temperature, again, we talk at temperature, we start at -5, temperature goes up 2 degrees, we end up at -3. Okay, but it's still moving to the right. Okay, if a positive number is subtracted from an integer, you move left. Okay, so if it's 2 minus a +3, for example, so 2 minus a +3, you're actually going to the left, so you're going towards more negative, okay, in this case. Alright, so 2 minus 3, again, think of temperature, we're at 2 degrees, temperature drops 3 degrees, 1, 2, 3, we end up at -1. Here we start at -4 and it drops another -2, so -4 drops another -2, we end up at -6. Okay, so if you think of it in terms of temperature, it does make things a little bit easier. So let's do an example here. Okay, and we've got a trusty number line here to help us out. So calculate the answer to these additions and subtractions. So if we've got -2 plus 3, if we start at -2, okay, and we're going to add 3, don't need that, we're going to add 3, 1, 2, 3, we end up at +1. So -2 plus 3 gives us an answer of +1. Okay, that easy. Now we start at -8 and +1. Actually, I'm going to get rid of that. Give me 1 sec, I just want to get rid of that drawing. Okay, so we end up with +1. Okay, now we're at -8 and we add 1. So -8 and we add 1. So if we're adding a positive integer, we're always going to go towards the positive. Okay, towards the positive all the time. So -8 plus 1, there we are, we're at -7. Okay, so we get rid of that. So our answer there is going to be -7. Alright, still a negative answer because we started, think of temperature. We're at -8, temperature rises 1 degree, we're now at -7. Now here we start at -5 and we're going to subtract 7. Oh, sorry, -5. We start at 5 and we subtract 7. So we start at 5 and we 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Alright, so we end up at -2. Sorry, let's get rid of all that again. Alright, so number line is very useful to working this stuff out. Otherwise, like I said, you think of it in temperature. We're at 5 degrees. It's going to drop 7 degrees. So we must end up at -2. Okay, here we're starting at -3 here. And we're going to drop 3. So we're going -3 from there. So 1, 2, 3. We're going towards the negative. Okay, so we end up at -6. Sorry, get rid of that stuff. And we end up at -6. Okay, so start at -3, temperature's at -3, drops another 3 degrees, we're at -6. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense to you. So that's basically exercise 7B. Alright, so that'll get you started. Alright, next part. Now this is a little bit more tricky. Now, hopefully you haven't quite watched this yet, but we need to go through some stuff in class to sort of try and get you to understand this stuff. This is requires a little bit more thinking. So adding and subtracting, this time negative integers. Alright, particularly if you have a look here, we're getting two, like a positive and a negative. Alright, now I'm going to explain to you that whenever you get these problems, you're going to rewrite the problem with one sign. You never want two signs in between a problem. Okay, that confuses people. So the best thing to do is actually change it just to one sign, either a plus or a minus, and I'm going to go through and explain how that works. Okay, so some notes here. Adding a negative number is equivalent to subtracting its opposite, and that makes it's very confusing. So adding a negative number is equivalent to subtracting its opposite. Alright, so if we've got a plus minus b, alright, what we're actually getting here is a minus. See how there's just one sign instead of the two here. Okay, so basically how this works is that if you have a positive and a negative, okay, if the signs are different, you are going to always end up with a negative. If your signs are the same, so two pluses or two minuses, okay, they'll always end up as a plus or a positive. Okay, and it's the easiest way to think about this one. And it's easy if you change the sign just to one single sign to do your calculation, because if you leave the two signs in, and in my experience lots of students try and do that and they just make lots of mistakes. Okay, so if you get two signs, either plus or minuses or pluses or two negatives in between two numbers, you change it to one symbol only, either a negative or a plus. So couple of the examples here. So if we've got 2 plus minus 3, so we've got a positive and a negative, so we've got a positive and a negative, so that just becomes a negative. So if we look here, 2 minus 3, okay, then you treat it exactly like we did in this these previous examples that we went through. Okay, so we start at 2, so if the temperature is at 2 degrees, we minus 3, it drops 3 degrees, we end up at -1. Alright, or if we use a number line, we start at 2 over here, go back 3 towards a negative, we end up at -1. Here, -4 plus -2, so we've got a positive and a negative here again. Positive and negative gives us a negative, so we end up with -4 minus 2. So we rewrite the equation just with one sign in there, not the two. Okay, so if we start at -4 and drop 2 degrees, we end up at -6, which gives us our answer. Alright, so subtracting a negative number is equivalent to adding its opposite. Again, that's very confusing. So put simply, if you have two negatives, so the symbols are the same, the signs are the same, two negatives, you have to write it as a positive. It becomes a positive. So two negatives gives a positive, two positives gives a positive. If the signs are different, positives and negatives, it gives a negative. So in our question here, we'll go up here for a minute. So two minuses, a minus there and a negative b. These two negatives make a positive. Okay, so it's actually a plus b, not a minus minus b. It actually becomes an a plus b. One sign, one symbol, much easier to deal with. So this example here, 5 minus -2, so the two negatives make a plus, so we end up with 5 plus 2, which then is easy, gives us a 7. Okay, or minus 2 minus minus 3. So these two negatives in here become a positive, so we end up with minus 2 plus 3. So we start at minus 2, we add 3, we get to 1. Alright, so that's the important thing you need to write up, is this, that if you have the signs are different, you end up with a negative. If the signs are the same, you end up with a positive. Let's do some examples quick to finish this up. So 7 plus minus 2. So if we've got a positive and a negative, what does that mean? Yeah, if they're different, positives, negatives, it becomes a negative. So it's 7 minus 2, which equals 5. That easy. Okay, minus 2 plus minus 3. So we write the first one, minus 2, got a plus and a minus. Again, plus and a minus, they're different. Gives us a negative. So minus 2 minus 3. Now I'm going to write my answer down here, which is I start at minus 2 degrees, drops another 3 degrees, I end up at minus 5. Okay, C. Write 1, 2 negatives. Two negatives, they're the same, they give us a positive. So I rewrite those two negatives, I write it as a positive, so 1 plus 3 gives us 4. Okay, these aren't that difficult, are they? Minus 6, minus 2, so it actually makes it a positive 2, which gives us, start at minus 6, add 2, so we're going more towards positive, takes us to minus 4. Okay, that will make sense when, if you have watched this before our class on Tuesday, or actually might be Monday, when we go through this stuff. How these negatives and positives work, it will make more sense to you hopefully when we talk about them on Monday when I go through some notes. But if you can at least have that written down, okay, in your books about adding and subtracting negative integers, if you get positives and negatives, it ends up in a negative. If they're both positive or both negative, you end up with a plus. Okay, so we never write, I never want to see you writing two signs in between any two numbers. Okay, we always just want one. So each of these we change to, instead of the positive and a negative, it became just a negative. Okay, here positive and negative became just a negative. Two negatives became a positive. Two negatives became a positive. Okay, and then we try and solve it. If you leave it like this, I'll tell you now, I've seen it hundreds and hundreds of times. Students make lots and lots of mistakes when they write equations with two signs in there. So, and again, it's important you understand this, because when we, things like algebra and expanding brackets, doing the distributive law and things like that, and you start getting positives and negatives, it's really important you understand how this works. All right, hopefully that makes sense. Now we're ready to do 7B and 7C. Good on you. Thanks guys, see you next time.